welcome back to the channel. Sister Kate here. Sitting on a log, sweating because I just spent the last hour or two weed whacking with my little 5-pound electric weed whacker. And I was killing these guys. This is Korean sesame, perella. It's uh, it's an annual, but it puts out so many seeds that if you don't kill it, it'll take over your property. And that's what it's doing, and so I'm trying to get rid of it so I can plant more beneficial plants. Ducks in the background. I guess I could show you them. See if I can angle this thing correctly. Where are they? I can't find it. They're back there somewhere. Anyway, I wanted to do a did you know kind of thing on something that I found amazing. So I went on a site that Michelle Rankin did. It's like discovery.org or .net or something, and it's supposed to be like a fact or dictionary type site, and it ran a little series of pictures on people who were born like in the 1700s and yet had their photographs taken, and they listed very many influential people. Started with people like John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president of the United States, born in the 1700s, son of John Adams, etc. And then I got to two people where it really struck me that these people influenced history in a way that we don't really understand. And the first one was Leo Tolstoy. Now, I know some of you remember him from your high school days when you had to read one of his massive novels about Russian aristocracy, Anna Karenina or War and Peace. And they're written of his time. Like I think War and Peace is the War of 1812 or something. I mean, it's certainly not a modern war. And he's writing about the Russian aristocracy because he came from a noble family. So he knew about all the intrigues and the romances and the way the life went for them. And then he had a profound change in his life. And he wrote many more books after that, but they aren't bestsellers and like classics and everything because he turned to faith. He read the Bible. He was converted by Jesus to become a Christian. And that would have been very unusual in Russia at the time because they were under a czarist government. And there was religion there. I think it was Eastern Orthodox. But Leo, being an intelligent kind of guy, he became a Christian anarchist. He, through reading the Bible and the teachings of Jesus, especially the Sermon on the Mount, he understood that the czarist government was not treating his fellow citizens right. And so he became convinced that anarchy was the best government. And anarchy is basically where everybody governs themselves. There is no government, there is no aristocracy or elected leaders or anything. It's each guy for himself. And so that's what he preached. He also, by reading mostly about Jesus and his things that he said and his teachings, became convinced that nonviolence was the way to deal with, I think, governments in particular, but life in general. And I'm sure under the czars, there was a lot of violence against the serfs. They would have uprisings and the military would come and just wipe them out. And that's probably what Tolstoy was reacting to. But what Tolstoy did, which many Christians do, is ignore the actual nature and teachings of the entire Bible, including Jesus, because Jesus was not a peacemonger. There are some quotes in there about Peter, putting away your sword, but Peter putting away his sword at the time that Jesus was being captured was not Jesus saying that nobody ever should have a sword. It was Jesus saying at this particular moment, that's not appropriate. He needed to be captured and he needed to be crucified that he could fulfill the scriptures that told of his coming and what he was required to do set up in the Old Testament. So that's why he stops Peter. But if you look at Matthew 23, might be Matthew 18, the verses where he's talking to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and saying they're vipers and hypocrites and saying that their teachings lead people astray and they're going to be condemned and so are their followers, is pretty violent language. It's pretty pretty strong, forceful stuff. And when he whips the merchants out of his father's temple, he's not using a wet noodle. He's not going, "Oh, you merchants, you're so naughty." He knows they're defiling his father's holy, sacred place with their merchandise and everything. And he's quite angry, and he literally whips them and kicks them out. So Tolstoy reads what he wants to read, and he applies it in a way that we do to his particular situation, just like Americans apply the Bible in their view, like in modern America, in which Jesus was not. And so he writes some books about that. God is Within You, I think, is one of them, and some other religious books. And people like, oh, and he wrote one to Hindus too. He wrote a book to Hindus because they were having troubles in their country under the British rule. And so he sent some of his writings on, nonviolence to Mahatma Gandhi, who was in South Africa at the time. If you watch my video on Spee and Cop, Mahatma Gandhi was there as an ambulance bearer in the Boer War. And so Tolstoy writes him a letter telling him about nonviolence and so on. And look at that, the sun coming through the leaves right there. I want to be in the shade because it's hot, but it makes me look like I'm a Pinto or an Appaloosa. Mahatma reads the teaching from Tolstoy. He becomes convinced that nonviolence is the way, and so that's where he starts his peaceful protest in his own country that eventually winds up with England leaving and India becoming its own country. And actually, the second ashram that Mahatma Gandhi opened, he called the Tolstoy ashram. So that's how much Tolstoy had an effect on Mahatma Gandhi, who then had an effect on our own American, Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King reads Mahatma Gandhi and understands that for him to have an overthrow of the segregationist system here in America, even in the 1900s, all the way up to 1960, and to end some of the very partisan violence against African Americans in this country, Tulsa being one of the main, the Black Wall Street event being a very large one, but there were other ones. There were smaller ones in Arkansas and all around the South and the country. Then Martin Luther King becomes convinced of the nonviolent protests, and so that's what we see in the late 60s, where people are Rosa Parks will not get to the back of the bus. There are people at a Woolworth lunch counter who just want to eat lunch, and they protest, and they are treated kind of violently, but they don't react back, and so on and so on. And now you get to what we're seeing in 2021, where basically everyone's getting on an equal footing. BLM is doing their protests, and they're advancing some of what they believe in, some for good, some for bad. But that all started back in Russia in the late 1700s. No, I think mid 1800s. Tolstoy died around 1908. That's like a 200-year-old idea, and it's a nice idea and it worked, but it's really not the nature of Jesus. And for modern day Christians to think, they just have to be peaceful pushovers and just, whatever, it's not the nature truly of the Bible and of what Jesus was doing. So I just wanted to give you all that perspective. I'll talk about Harriet Tubman in my next video. Woo, you want to talk about a spy master, that woman. Yeah. All right, bless y'all. I got to get back to my work. Shalom.